just here to chat about stuff that we love. This is self-cultivation, martial arts, Buddhism, Buddhist psychology and philosophy, internal art, and all fields related, to human development, to self. And this is why we're here. So, Kristina, why did this idea came to you to start this podcast?
Honestly, like I feel that you and I, when we first met, we realized that we have so many things, so many shared interests across our research in university and also just our love of martial arts and our exploration and wish to discover different martial arts and different ways of practicing through the various conditions that we find ourselves in, like depending on what's happening for us personally, or we may have gone through injury, and we were we had different ways of dealing with these stages through practice. And I mean practice, I mean, at least for me, I know that like having a physical practice and having a martial arts practice was really something that was like an anchor and something I could rely on and come back to throughout the like different moments of my life. And I suppose, yeah, when I met you and I started to talk to you about that, I noticed, I mean, like we discovered that each of us, but both of us had a way of dealing and moving through these difficult times, or even just moving through these different moments through our practice.
Yes, indeed. And I think there is a lot experience to be had in this process of, overcoming life challenges, dealing with injuries, seeking for spiritual path, perhaps. Definitely, the mediums which both of us have done it was applied somatic practice grounded in discipline and endurance, physical prowess and skill, definitely fostered by martial arts. And of course, both of us have stepped a bit further from martial arts into something like academic research, internal cultivation, spiritual practice. So that's why we decided to start the podcast. The theme that we are going to explore today is what's our theme?
Well, we've talked about it, and we thought for the first episode we would like to discuss integrating different modalities or interdisciplinary practices. So integrating interdisciplinary practices without watering them down.
Yes, indeed, that was the plan. See how we stick to it. Can I ask you, what do you understand by interdisciplinary practices? What are those practices in your life?
Well, for me, interdisciplinary means creating a bridge between established methodologies. So, for example, my my research around compassion, the theme of compassion, bridged Buddhist philosophy and practice with research through design. So that was it's just an example of how my research was at the intersection of these two seemingly separate separate fields. What about you? How do you understand interdisciplinary practice?
Likewise, I would say my research also been grounded in interdisciplinary studies. I've been bridging a few fields in my research, which was Evgenii and analysis, then Buddhist praxis, then movement arts in general, and within movement arts field, I have different arts such as karate, martial arts in general, parkour, dance, and actually swimming as well, and then internal arts realm too. So for me, was these three fields were well, three broad fields and then some fields within them. They were all united or brought together by the topic of how can one deal with traumatic experiences. So I guess the way I understand how interdisciplinary practice can be integrated is what unites these different practices in terms of what problem do they help to resolve.
Yeah, that's really so fascinating. Again, just listening to you talk about how many areas your own exploration actually encompassed. And so, what was the key problem that you were seeking to solve? What's an example of a problem?
Well, within my personal journey, the key kind of crucial event, which was shattering and traumatic for me, was the what happened to my father, his brain stroke, and subsequent disintegration of ideal figure whom I admired and aspired to imitate in my own development, turn into something opposite something, someone debilitated and disabled essentially and gradually deteriorating. It was a big uh, event which was difficult to process. It was sort of paradigm shift as to how something ideal can turn into something real. And real here, I mean, bound by suffering, not divorced from sickness, not free from inevitable death. That very question as to how something can turn uh, in the blink of an eye into uh, its opposite. So the very fact of impermanence of worldly conditions, which by its very nature traumatic. So that's the problem, was for me at least. But if we, extrapolate to wider fields, what are the qualities of the inevitable, insurmountable problems that people have to deal with, encounter on a daily basis, like a loss of a loved one, breakdown of a relationship, or a health problem, or you know, your life falling apart in some other way. Uh, Say within Buddhism, we'll be talking about it as suffering. Within psychoanalytic framework, that which we encounter within the psyche, that would be called real. Real, that is something not possible to process through conceptual mind or through uh, the imaginary properties of the ego, something extraordinary. And yeah, well, that's the problem. And for me, the variety of solutions that interdisciplinary practice offers is to deal with that problem. How about yourself? How do you uh, understand the value and necessity and purpose of interdisciplinary practice?
I suppose, like, I just have a lot of interests. So, um, I started karate when I was 8 years old. Um, and and I didn't really like it at first, but then once I think I realized when I was about 11 that I was quite good at it, even though I didn't really know what that meant. But people started telling, like I started from the external world, I was getting feedback um, that I seemed to be like have some talent, for karate. So when I got a sense of that, then I kind of became much more interested and I started competing. And when I started to win competitions, um, that's when I really became quite quite addicted to winning. But so throughout this time, like for me, like I'm also trying to establish myself, as a fighter, as a competitor, um, to prove something to myself and um, to do well for my team and everything. So I was really spending a lot of time, like, and energy creating this kind of identity for myself that I felt like I could rely on. Um, and of course, as this was happening, much to my parents' confusion, because they just thought that I had started karate as a hobby, but I was sort of more interested in making it central in my life. So already there seems to be this split of like, what my family wanted for me and kind of what I was doing. And and I suppose, having to always have this like multiple approach of like, okay, I'm a student athlete, or, like it always like had a hyphen in the title that I was. And so for me, um, having like multiple hats of my identity and who I was, like it seemed to be normal, but also at the same time it was like it poses itself as a struggle, because I was always I have continued to wrestle with, what I'm supposed to be in inverted commas, and trying to categorize that. And it's only recently that I'm just, starting to really let go of like what the label should be. So in terms of, interdisciplinary practice, like I suppose like the way I think about that is not following um, just one path. I don't think that way would be conducive to my mind, and would, even being completely immersed in karate, I could see that already that there was um, some gaps in knowledge, or areas that are implicit that I would need another practice or another body of knowledge to to support or fill that gap. So, I've always been interested in art. I've been interested in philosophy. And I suppose, like I have a thirst for research and moving towards that academic side as well. So, for me to like bridge these areas in different ways is to to respond to some of the questions I had about myself and my identity, and what I wanted, what I was trying to achieve, other other issues that I faced, as well, like over these years, whether it be like mental challenges or physical obstacles, or, external goals that I had that I was chasing. I always felt more natural to have this like multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary approach to these problems.
Thank you. Let's see. Indeed, I feel that it is more natural to approach problem, whatever they are, of angles. And I guess that's the beauty of all of the human knowledge and experience, both secular and spiritual, that we have such a wealth, the different ways of dealing with problems. And I think a very big and important part in all this wealth of knowledge and expertise that is available. And I think this part is quite often missed or misunderstood. It's actually the knowledge of the body, how to deal with this situation of being in the body, what's the uh, value and the role of the physical training, bodily training, where it's place, how does it connect with the psyche, with the mind.
Yes, well, thank you for bringing that up, because I was actually, as you were speaking, reflecting. Do you think, I mean, did you begin to establish this foundation of training the body from when you were quite young?
Yes, indeed. Thanks to my father, I was kind of both made and inspired to train, do the practices. My father wasn't any specialized athlete, but he was very good, well developed physically. He could do many things very well. Swim butterfly style across the river, meters back and forth. He could play volleyball with the local team. He could do chin-ups, no problem. Just a very strong, athletic kind of guy. And that was very inspiring for me as a kid to follow in his footsteps. So I started to, do things like calisthenics. I make myself wake up every morning 1 hour before the necessary time of waking up to go to school in order to do morning exercises. Nobody made me, I just decided. And so it kind of carried on from there. I have not joined any particular sports or sport club until later, till I was in the university, when I joined karate team at the university. But before that, I was, heavily involved in self-development, physical development, natural ways of movement, running, climbing, swimming, calisthenic exercise, gymnastic exercise, and at some point I have also found parkour, the art of motion, and the art of overcoming obstacles, developed in France in the 80s of the previous century. That really inspired me as well to try and develop physicality, the capability of this body with the ethos of, being useful, developing strengths, to be useful for others. Then after having gone through this variety of training, I have started discovering the value and the benefit it gave me in terms of dealing with the mind and the psyche, and sometimes psychic discord and unrest. How much the strong bodily foundations have contributed to uh, being able to be well in myself. To answer the question.
Yeah, I mean, you've covered like a lot of different movement practices. So you mentioned calisthenics, you mentioned running and swimming, and also parkour, and that it seems like you've spent a lot of time as well developing. And of course, there's martial arts. Um, I guess like if you had to reflect a little bit on each of these practices, well, what do you think it is? Do you think they have any sort of unifying themes that attracted you um, to sticking with them?
First of all, is being able to do something. I was always attracted to the arts that enabled me to do something I couldn't do before. For example, in the place where I grew up, there is a river, Surrey River, which is about 200 meters wide. It's when there is water, it's wide. And I was challenged to, will I be able to swim across it there and back? Like, no problem, just and swimming is one of those arts. It's like you either swim or you don't, or you drown. So you're either able to do it or not. That's all what attracted me. And all the other arts are done. Can you do something? Can you overcome something within yourself, or can you develop yourself so you can do something? Later on, it became a foundation I call the real body. The real body. And there's a difference between imaginary body, symbolic body, as we discuss it in, say, psychoanalytic discourse. For example, ego is based on imaginary body, the body which is overwritten by image of the other, which you pick up from as a subject in becoming from somebody else. You pick it up from a parent, from a sibling, from perhaps a collection of other identities which then constitutes your imaginary sense of wholeness. So that imaginary body is congruent only as far as identification, which sustained it, lasts. But once it's stopped or challenged by something, this sense of wholeness is lost. And with it, also a degree of motor coordination, self-control, and self-confidence are lost as well. So that's the problem, of course, of ego identification and of narcissism. When the set of supportive conditions, preferential conditions are destroyed, what you're left with. And if you don't have any real physical proofs, you are left with disjointed, fragmented identity, incapable of doing stuff, carrying out actions. So that's the value of physical pain movement for me. The perspective of its crossover, the self-development is the area of the psyche. I'm curious to know how is your experience, perhaps apart from the those questions with self-identity that you've been having, and the way how you established yourself as the competitive winning athlete. What were there as the benefits of physical practice that you've done, that you found?
Yes, yes. So the style of training that I have am used to since I was a child is I'm thinking of a way of phrasing it that it's really hard training. It's hard. So um, it's physically very demanding on the joints, on the mind, and a lot of it is about drills, like a lot of drills that we did, a lot of drills to put this information into the body, so that it becomes just part of the natural way of moving and reacting. And often because I feel like I'm quite a slow learner, so it just took me quite a long time for some things to really let them to finally receive the knowledge through the body. So even though I'd be watching often what to do, and usually even conceptually, it's more difficult to get for me. So can you imagine, like it was quite a slow process for some things um, to first imagine the movement and then to do the movement and to then adjust and correct the movement. And sometimes, there's balance, there's other issues that come into it. So I guess it's like getting down to the nitty-gritty there, but in terms of, yes, bringing my body to the level, the level that you need to compete internationally, the idea of softness really doesn't come into the training very frequently. At least for me, it was never part of the vocabulary. But yeah, so it was really, for many years, especially the formative years, like the first 10 years that I trained, a lot of it was about repetition, consistency, which was challenging because, as a kid, you come up with a lot of reasons why you can't go, you're justifying a lot of things, but I guess you're learning these lessons over time. And it's definitely not linear, that's for sure. But I was training a lot. So the frequency and the volume of training that I was doing was very high. Like we're talking, let's say 3 to 4 hours, maybe a day, 6 days or 7 days a week. Because I really had nothing else to do as a child. I had other I mean, there was obviously other things to do, but being an only child, my mother would just, I would get home from school and then I would just get picked up by my coach, and then we would go to 3 or 4 classes that evening, and then I would get dropped back off at home at about 9:30 at night. So, so that was pretty much the drill for many years. And then, uh, sorry, I've just forgotten your question in terms of the value of
Yeah, the value of this kind of physical training, the volume and the
oh the
intensity
volume.
for other aspects of your life, perhaps
Right,
for
right.
your mind and your
Yeah.
psyche.
So
And,
yes, yes. So thank you, thank you. Yes. So as I got lost in like the remembering of my younger years of training at the time, obviously I was motivated largely extrinsically through goals, because that's the type of person I am, goal driven. I mean, also like, listening to you talk about, wanting to do something, wanting to be able to do something. Like I also had those wishes as well as I was training. Like I would see, okay, I want to be able to do a certain technique. And, I knew that it was just a matter of time before something clicks into place, but it's also a matter of repetition and being and having to do those and having to repeat it over and over and over, 100,000 million times. For me, like in my mind, that volume of repetition, some reason my mind kind of enjoys it. So I don't know if that's normal, but like I realized that I like drills and I like repetition and I like incremental progress. So even as a child, I didn't really have too much issue with the reps, but I guess I didn't realize its value until recently when I have now moved away from structure into a realm where I'm navigating by myself essentially, and I'm discovering my own path. I'm, forging my own path in terms of how I want to practice, how I want to train, how I want to improve, because I don't have these externally defined goals. Like when I was competing at high level, it's very clear, like you start this time of the year, it's December, the calendar is out for next year. So I would just look at the calendar of competitions that I would need to do. Um, I would see, okay, Australian Open is here, Nationals is here, this is an international tournament I would like to compete. I'd have to, I want to go to, so I have to do the trials. There's like selection trials that happen earlier in the year. So then, and basically my whole calendar would be planned around this prescribed structure. And, that was great for me, like, because I'm a person as well who responds really well to structure. Then when I became injured, and I mean, after having to deal with injury, and then deciding, okay, noticing this shift away from competition, then suddenly that the calendar is redundant, and and things like consistency of training really depends on what I want to get out of it myself, and I had to find some other goals and some other reasons and some other motivations. And I mean, I think they were always there, but it's just that they were overshadowed always by these external goals that were really taking the limelight for me. So, I mean, if we take it outside of the karate arena, like it's always served me. I've always thought that although it was a really, I mean, I don't see myself as a very disciplined person, but but it's interesting because I think when other people meet me, they think that I'm quite disciplined because I just keep going. Like I know that consistency is a big part of progressing, even if you don't know what you're doing. And a lot of the time, having a coach, so having a mentor who sees you from the outside, who's so kind to criticize you and tell you, what you need to improve, that was something that I really relied on as well. So, my relationship with my coach fed into the way that I would approach my training. So, like, it became something that was more than just something I was doing for myself. It was like I was proud to be part of this community, part of the dojo that I was at. So, and also my team, So that sort of value system where my karate club was like my family, the way that I would approach training. I was going there because not only I didn't want to didn't want to miss the training, not just for myself, but also for because people were showing up for me, you know. Yeah.
Hmm,
I mean, I'm
thank
just
you.
fascinated because, well, I mean, I'm just so fascinated because for you, like, you didn't start karate training until university, and which means that you were really self-motivated throughout this whole time, like through teenage years. And I mean, that was a very challenging period for me to stay on track, as they say. And you know, you mentioned that you were just, you know, like you were driven by. I guess like wanting to like what was the main driver apart from, you know, being able to want to do something? Or I mean, you've mentioned overcoming something. Was it intrinsic or were there also some external factors, you know, that you were interested in moving towards?
Yeah, definitely. Well, before I answered your question, I just like to a little bit reflect on what you said. Um,
Mm,
I think it's very cool and important and valuable and massively underrated these days, namely discipline. How much it takes to develop discipline. Not many people really have discipline these days. Like they may have, you know, interest in something or enthusiasm, but to actually persevere with something it requires that like the repetitions, countless amount of, and sometimes it's boring, sometimes it's dull, sometimes nothing at all. Chewing a plain rice, as they say, and you still do it. You still carry on. You still repeat. I think the value of that is massive, really, and uh, the role of it in terms of mental health is huge. I think a lot of the problems these days having to do with ADHD or whatever is that human beings underrated the discipline, the importance of the ability to stay with something and repeat something over a long period of time. Basically, like in terms of cultivational art, they say it's attention training. Like when someone wants to develop mindfulness, what they do, they stay with an object of their focus for a long period of time, and they prevent the mind from wandering elsewhere. They stay with that object. And it's not easy to develop through mind alone. It's easy to stay focused on something you're interested in. But as soon as something else impinges upon your awareness, something displeasing you don't want to deal with, you just turn away and go elsewhere. So my question or commentary is, where does ADHD start and where does absence of discipline and that line is a bit, blurred these days. Just a reflection of how awesome
hmm
I've gone through traditional training in terms of martial arts and whatever as a physical modality. And they also have the reflection upon the value of community that you mentioned, but yeah,
Mm,
stay away from it for now. And actually, it's
mm,
interesting because when I was growing up, I didn't have much in the value of supportive community in terms of what I wanted to do. Quite often, I had to go against the environment I was growing up at to do what I wanted to do, go
mhm,
against the grain. Hardly anyone support me in the aspirations of physical development and studies that I wanted to do, the wide outlook on the mind, on the psyche, on the body. From where I come from, like a small town in the far east of Russia, resort town, people had a very kind of closed mentality. Okay, you do this, you do that, you make money, you have family, have a house and a car, and live your life like that. And you have this certain ideology and set of values, normally based around materialistic values, or You have Orthodox Christian spiritual values. That's the kind of environment. And whatever else you receive from the conditioning and propaganda through the TV. And like the big motivation for me was how not to not to be dragged into this story that is being told by everyone around me. Because I felt from the bottom of my heart that my aspiration was different towards something else, towards them, something genuine, something real, transcendence, perhaps. First was very basic. I just wanted to see the world, to see other places, other countries, see how other people live around. So my motivation was, right, how do I get out from this little town and go somewhere else? So I started studying, training, learning languages, studying English, um, whatever I could do to follow that goal. And yeah, the physical training was a big anchor in this development for me. Without having that, physical prowess to sustain myself against the grain, against all odds, um, the environment, the culture, the mentality. Uh, just had to be strong. So I did that. I did the training. And it was also a very big liberating factor because I discovered that through this, self-assurance that you develop by means of physical prowess and independence of your own judgment and mental faculties you have, you can actually be free and okay within yourself, regardless of what is happening around you.
Yes, actually, I do. I was just listening to you talk about, this desire to get out of this little town that you had grown up in. And I have to say that, like, I also had a wish to see the world. And I was also curious about how the people are, outside. I really had a strong urge to travel. And I could see that, you know, at that time, practicing and getting better and developing myself in that way was a pathway to do that. So I suppose, underlying um, the idea of, developing myself in Australia and even just in like the domestic competition scene, I really I think underlying that was this real, desire to experience the world, to have, to expand myself and yeah, to have these experiences and to gain some greater wisdom, that I had heard of, but I had no direct contact with yet. And and the other thing that really resonated with me in what you said was having this physical training as an anchor. So I suppose the period of time I'm talking about is between like 16 to, let's say, like 21 or 20, 21 to 23, like that time where, so much is happening. Like there's so much being input in terms of emotion and in terms of like external experience. So, having this physical anchor, I really could depend on myself in that context. So I really understood and could relate to myself in a very authentic way as I was training. So developing that sense of self-assurance, as you said, was something that I really like now looking back, like I knew that I was a better person for sticking with the training and sticking with this practice. I knew that I was developing a sense of, who I was, a confidence about my commitment to stay with this this training and this practice. So, I mean, yeah, it's interesting because I guess in that phase, like of the foundations, would you say that it's like you have a sense of your internal anchors, but then largely we can see that our engagement with practicing and developing ourselves physically also had a lot to do with, what we wanted to experience in the world.
Absolutely. I think the perspective is crucial. The only thing really that limits people in the development is perspective. The greater goal, the purpose, why you do things. To me, that's very much hinged upon your desire. If desire is inhibited by something, you know, psychoanalytic theory has a great deal to say about what inhibits desire. It's certain, signifying elements which have been, imposed upon the developing mind by the cultural conditioning that it's been brought up in. They're usually belittling, self-limiting, or downrightly disparaging, signifying elements which came from whoever. Could be a parent or others, could be teachers, could be peers, whatever. And people like kids, teenagers, when they are still forming themselves, incorporate those words, those signifiers into themselves, and they become like a nudge from the inside. Of course, they become dislodged into the unconscious. They function subliminally, and without knowing it, their desire gets stifled by some injunctions that have been imposed upon them from outside. And yeah, why people do incorporate disparaging, belittling, delimiting words and narratives also depends on the person. I guess in Buddhist talk, we would say it depends on the karma. The bottom line is that this internal self-nagging uh, stifles desire. When desire is stifled, I think your mind gets stifled as well. You become inhibited in your capacity to have a perspective on the world. And you and me, having traveled the world, having seen many different people, different cultures, how people live, the world is huge and so diverse. There are so many ways to skin the cat, as they say. So many ways to do things, to approach problems, to develop the body, even physical training. There's so many facets to speak about, approaches to the mind, psyche, connections with something higher, spirituality. I think like my big motivation is when I work with people, as clients, or help somebody is how to free up a desire, show the other possibilities, broaden the perspective. There is so much value in freedom to be had from liberated mind. I guess that's why I'm quite cautious when people are fundamentalist or when people are completely uh, unified with the traditions that they practice. I see that with them, that broadness perspective is kind of lost or kind of put on a very narrow railing.
Do you mean people who don't have the type of mindset, like an open-mindedness about doing things differently? Is that what you mean? Or a little bit
I
more
guess
than
so.
that?
Yeah. There are various kinds of orthodoxy or dogmatism, is in whatever field you really encounter. And to me, that's the source of inhibition, stifling of the desire that then is transmitted intergenerationally from one generation to the next. That's how, they're very close and tight, clinging to a certain way, a certain perspective, certain narrative, be it philosophical or religious or practical in some field. I think it causes so much conflict, necessary conflict.
Mm. There is something though about like staying true and diluting like what we know. I think we're not really talking about diluting different ways of doing things. We're still
No, no, no,
um
definitely not.
yeah,
Mm. That
yeah.
brings me back to the value of correct interdisciplinary practice. You can only do interdisciplinary practice correctly if you have in depth understood the nuances of all the practices involved in what you do. Otherwise, you will be superficial. And this is very much, the problem of liberal New Age spirituality. Everything leads to the same place, well, kind of spiritual practice. In some way, it's true, but how does it do so? What are the nuances? How is that? That's, you know, as the Russian saying goes, that where the dog is buried. Don't know why they have the saying. That's the nitty gritty. But this is where the dog is buried.
Oh, this is where the dog is buried.
And yeah, that's the root of it, really. That's the essence of it, or something. Say something in those lines. Um,
I don't get that.
it's hard to get. As being Russian, don't even see what's the logic of it, to be honest. Uh, which dog? Why wasn't buried anyway? Doesn't matter. The point being is, yeah, that the watering down of even traditional approaches is not the way of correct disciplinary practice. Uh, you need to go deep into the practice before you can unite it with another practice, having gone deep into that another practice. And that, of course, requires that's the broadness of perspective that I'm talking about. It's not a vague, shallow broadness. It's a sophisticated uh, depth, expertise of every tradition or discipline that you're involved with, you're incorporating to what you're doing, and to your research or into your practice or into your way of dealing with problems in life. And I think it's quite hard to do. Like, I haven't met many people who can successfully do interdisciplinary practice. And yet, kind of all the sane, very, very normal people whom I met, uh, they tend to be operated like this. Because I think that's the property of healthy mind to go deep into various fields and seek for congruent, integral solution, relying on different disciplines.
Mm. We both had a really strong foundation, like a physical foundation as children. And then, you know, we it's kind of like we developed I mean, I think you developed your discipline earlier than me. Mine's still developing. But but um but you know, we saw some value in the practice and I mean we have touched on a little bit and we will talk about it I'm sure again in future episodes, but about our own journeys and how we've brought in different practices. We haven't really spoken about like why one over the other for a particular time, but I guess like this last point that you mentioned in terms of going in deep, I think for me, what I love about karate and what I love about the internal arts and what I love about Buddhism is that it's like entering a room and just seeing the profound depth of these practices and not being able to really understand everything at first. You know, even now, as I repeat the same kata that I've done for 30 years, I'm still learning through the body how to do things better and how to express myself more efficiently or more cleanly. You know, it's really fascinating, and the way that we see the world as we go deeper into this various arts or philosophies is that we're opening ourselves to these paradigm shifts, and we're like, you know, we're kind of cultivating this non-fundamentalist. I can't remember what you mentioned about, you know, just having this openness to adapt, you know, ourselves to the knowledge that we're taking in.
I would like again to emphasize yeah, and beauty of actually having developed the body in strong, intense ways, not to, to boast or to uh, show off. It's just, good. It's wholesome. The foundation like that is, I think it needs to be pursued, and I see it pursued by people like who are actually, reasonable. They get their children to go do martial arts or sports or whatever, some other kinds of athletics, because that's the foundation, the real body. That's every human being needs, not sitting in front of the screen and getting drowning into video games, whatever. Uh, and sitting on your phone, being online, developing this kind of imaginary personality about yourself based on sense. But actually, uh, experiencing the physicality, getting hit, getting punched, falling, rolling, swinging, getting dirty, knowing the real limitations of this body and its actual extent of its uh, fragility, so to speak, extent of its robustness. I think it's very important for the capacity to manage healthy desire for life, which is not stifled fundamentalist. Because very often I find that people with that kind of narrow perspective actually not comfortable in their bodies. So they have to compensate through other means, through some strict adherence to some paradigm or a dogma, being
Mm-hmm.
able to be in the body. Of course, there are some other factors in the body, such as your karma, your morality, what you do, your deeds, the conscience that's affected by those. But perhaps that's a chat for another time.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that's a great way, a great place to end it, you know, in terms of just speaking of the way that we move through life as in an no, the way that we move through an embodied life, um, and not an idealized or imaginary life, that we need to that foundation comes, whether it comes at a young age or whether as we develop it throughout our life, there is a necessary foundation. I really loved what you said about understanding the limits of our body and also its potentials, and how to lean into the robustness, but and also like acknowledge and learn about the fragility. It's really something I think that I guess we'll be speaking about more in the future in terms of how these two sides or perspectives fit in, and how we can understand that through practice.
Indeed. Thank you very much. That was a very lovely, pleasant chat.
Thank you very much.